Hi there, everyone. My name is Carla, and I am your relationship doula, helping you birth peace in the pieces of your life. I am a relationship and stress management coach, and I have a couple of books out there for my stress makeover series. I know you guys haven't seen me in a minute. Life has been happening, and so I just haven't been able to do one of my little conversations with Carla for a minute. But I decided that I was going to hop on today, and I know many of you may not be able to hear it live, but you'll see it there on the replay. And that's good because this is Mother's Day. But for some mothers, it's not a happy Mother's Day. And I decided I'm going to tackle that conversation that we may not like to have because when we don't tackle those conversations that are difficult conversations with ourselves and with others, it causes stress in our lives. And my whole premise is to help you manage your stress so that you can live a longer, healthier, more fulfilled life. So, we're just going to dive into that so that you could see if you have some aha moments during this time. Now, this is a disclaimer for those of you who have a great relationships with your moms. Hooray to you. Kudos to you. This is not for you. We're grateful that you have a great relationship with your mom, that your children have a great relationship with you, and that they call you, they let you see the grandchildren's. Kudos to you. This conversation is for those mothers who that's not the case. So we're just going to delve into here. And of course, if you have any chats that you want to do either now or later, definitely feel free to post them in the chat. And when I get around to it, I'll definitely comment on that. And so I am going to just be keeping my eye on the chat section there so that you can see that as well. So, in my coaching practice, I've come across plenty of women who do not have a great relationship with their children. Some have been cut off by their children, or some of them, they have cut their children off. This is a judgment free zone. Not We're not trying to decide who was in the wrong or who was in the right. This space is just a space where we can talk about breaking that silence. And that's come, I like the title, Breaking the Silence, Mothers, Mistakes, and Moving On. How can we move forward? Many of us live in the past. We're kind of stuck there. And I just want to help you as a woman to move forward in that journey. So, what is it going to look like? So, what we're going to be doing today, we're going to try to just offer some support and some understanding to mothers who are struggling with the feelings of inadequacy and guilt. How many of you are there? You know, you may not want to comment because you may find it embarrassing and nobody else knows how you're feeling or are aware that your children aren't communicating with you on a regular basis or aren't communicating with you at all. But this is a safe space. You can message me privately if you want to have that conversation to talk about what that looks like and how you're feeling with that. And so I want to be able to help you to acknowledge past mistakes and what does the journey of self-forgiveness looks moving forward, and talk about whether or not it would be possible to reconcile with your children. I'm not going to tell you that it's possible. It could be that it's done. And you just have to learn to accept that, whatever that looks like. So, what I'm going to do, I want us to dive into the complexities of motherhood. No one ever really told you that it was going to be that difficult. And I know people say, you were a child yourself and you didn't realize that motherhood was going to be so challenging. I applaud the newer generation, but there was a time in our society where it was it was you were made to believe that if you didn't have children, then you weren't a woman, you weren't fulfilled. So many women who may have realized that they weren't cut out to be mothers had children when they weren't cut out to be mothers. So I applaud those women who understand that, hey, I'm not cut out to be a mom. So for those of you women doing your thing now, my I salute you for being brave enough to say, that's not my cup of tea. I'm not going to have any children. Some of us back in the day didn't have those options. We didn't have the options of different forms of prevention for not having children. And so they had children and they weren't equipped to mother and have children. So let's talk about some of the complexities when it comes to motherhood. And if you have a particular one that you want to jump in and share, definitely do that. But one of the things where we have to understand, and I want, as I support the mothers who no longer or have a fragmented relationship with their children, or for a child who may be listening, um, just give you an inside glimpse of what could have been happening to your mom during that time. But one of the things was mental health. Now, I applaud the generation now where mental health is spoken about and you do it. Give some of us grace, especially those of us of brown and black descendants. We didn't have access to mental health back in the day. And so, therefore, I'm not excusing it, but I'm just letting you know that we didn't have mental health back in the day. And this is just a side note, but I saw this one GIF or one little reel, and it was talking about, and it had a African American woman and a white Caucasian woman, and they were saying, "Oh, of course I'm not emotionally available because my parents or my mom did X, Y, and Z." And I was just a little pissed when I saw that because I said, for a Caucasian person to talk about their parent wasn't emotionally available, I don't know their story. But I know for most African American women back in the day, it was a struggle just to survive. So, yes, they may not have been emotionally available for their children and their daughters. So they said, oh, that's how come I'm not emotionally available now. And I said, yeah, we're going to talk about the mistakes that we made. I'm not going to negate that. But what I want us to have the dialogue is about grace and forgiveness and being able to move on from what you perceive you should have had from us. But, we're just a couple generations from slavery. And so I want our young women, girls, to know that there were certain things that your mama and your grandma didn't have a choice about. And so, yes, we cause trauma and pain. We're not negating that. I'm not negating that whatsoever. But I just need you to see it from a different perspective and give some grace. And I'm going to acknowledge your pain that we may have done to our children because of that. But please, when I saw that with the Caucasian and the African American, I'm like, hold up, hold up, hold up. Again, that Caucasian person had a little bit more privileges than we did. So that was just a side note. And you may disagree with me, and that's fine. We all have our own opinions. And so we're going to go from there. But I'm going to get back to the mental health issue that sometimes are the complexity of motherhoods. So you have that feeling of being overwhelmed, and we now know about postpartum depression. You have depression and anxiety after birth. And again, back in the day, for women of color, you didn't get you didn't you just couldn't say, oh, you have postpartum. It wasn't that easy to just say, oh, get over it, you had a child. We weren't given that kind of grace. You had a child, you got up the next day or two, depending, and you went back to your regular routine. And so, therefore, again, just giving you a perspective about some of the complexities of motherhood. You also forget that back in the day, you were around a village. You may have had aunties and families around, but as we moved out of our communities, we no longer had a village to help us with our children. You were basically doing it alone for most of us. You know, you moved out trying to have better opportunities. And so, therefore, single parents, fathers may have gone off to war or may have been incarcerated, or it could have been an unwanted pregnancy from trauma from, and we don't want to talk about that, but that happens when there was something traumatic that occurred, and so now you're pregnant with a child. And so there's those feelings of isolation, and here you are trying to raise a child with mental health issues, feeling of isolation. And so therefore we did cause harm to our children because of those things. It's not excuse, it's just information. And then one of the things that we have to understand with the complexity of motherhood was the own shadow of trauma or overcoming the past from your own mom. So they may have been abuse, physical, emotional type of abuse, abandonment, trauma that happened. And back in the day, we didn't have these resources that you currently have access to, which I applaud you. Please take advantage of seeing a therapist, speaking to someone. But women from my generation and behind, I don't know if many of them, some of them may have chosen to talk about their trauma with someone. Some of them aren't. They just going to take that to their grave about that. But they had their own trauma. And because they experienced trauma, you experienced trauma. You know, they talk about the ACE, the adverse, oh, can't even remember right now off the top of my head for that acronym. But because your parent, your mother had trauma, you then experienced trauma because they weren't present for you. So please do your work now as the daughter, if you choose to have children, to now create a different scenario for the next generation, but not making excuses, just giving information. And then there's always the family pattern that they didn't see good role models. And so they couldn't even do it for their children because they didn't have good role models. And then you have the cultural pressures. I knew I was raising my children in a Caribbean background, and I didn't want to do it the same way that they did because I found it harsh and uncaring. But what did I end up doing? I ended up doing the same thing to my child that I didn't want done. And I know it caused trauma and it caused friction in our relationship because you didn't do it differently. But the one thing that saved me, I eventually took a parenting class. Believe it or not, guys. I took a parenting class, and so my other children had a different experience than my first child. But my first child got all the flaws and mistakes of me as a parent because I didn't know what I was doing and I caused trauma. And so being aware of that. So you have financial strains. If you're the trying to make ends meet, you don't have time to play and interact with your child because you're just trying to make sure they have food on the table. Simple as that. And you forget that the child may feel neglected because you didn't pay them any attention. And all you're trying to do is make sure that they don't starve to death. But again, as a child, they don't understand that. All they see is that, oh, my mom or my dad, my mom, we're talking about moms, isn't there for me. She's neglecting me. And all you're trying to do is do what you can. So we're just talking about some of the complexities that happen there, but definitely feel free to interject there in the if you have any comments that you want to put in. And again, this is Mother's Day, but it is for those mothers who aren't necessarily going to have a happy Mother's Day because they don't have a relationship with their children. But thank you, those of you who are tuning in to Conversations with Carla as we talk about Balance, breaking the silence, Mother's Day, mother's mistakes, and moving on. So the other thing that I want you to understand that sometimes we have to deal with is just that internal conflict that arises, that we're a failure, that you're a failure as a mom. I heard in church, the gentleman was trying to be, prolific with, oh, a mother is a praying woman, a mother is a mature woman. And I just sat there trying not to roll my eyes, because I don't know about you, but I was not mature when I had my child. How many of you will want to raise your hand and acknowledge that? I was not mature, and I was not praying for my child when I was a young, ignorant mom who didn't know what I was doing. And so when you hear those, all I could do is just say, he means well. But there's so many women out here who aren't having a relationship with their children because of mistakes that we made. But how can we move on? Let's talk about it. I believe when you turn on the light, the roaches leave the room. Turn on the light to your hurt so that you're able to heal and move on with what's been done. We can't undo what happened 20, 10 years ago. What we can do is be accountable, acknowledge, and aware of what we've done, make attempts to reconcile that, and be able to move on. So I know you guys could possibly have some stories out there that you have had with parents, with stories. It could be your story. A couple stories that I know in my own life, where children don't show up for their parents' funeral. You think, oh, how could that ever happen? Again, I don't judge, because I don't know what may have happened in that home to cause that child to say, I'm done. I'm done. And you, as a young person, as a child, have a right. If you feel that your parent isn't positive or productive in your life, I agree. For peace sake, for your mental health, if it means disconnecting from a family, from a parent, you have to do what you have to do. I'm never going to argue with anyone about their decision to do that, because most likely they're not sharing the full story of what has happened in their home. It's not for me to say. So those are some things that I've seen. I have seen personally where I had a young lady on my podcast about a couple years ago, where she didn't find out until as an adult who her father was, because her mother gave her a different impression about who her father was. And she found out that wasn't the case. With this DNA ancestry stuff, oh, that's going to be quite interesting. I had a good friend who told me she always wondered why her mother treated her, in her eyes, very unkindly. And she did one of those DNA ancestries, and she said, Carla, I always wondered. She knew she looked different. And so she said, you know what? I found out that I was X, and she mentioned a particular nationality. She says, it makes so much sense. And so, but here she is, my age, and she doesn't know how to have this conversation with her mom. What do you say? Because again, we don't know if her birth was an outcome of something traumatic that the mom just doesn't want to talk about. But she just decided, you know what? I don't know how to bring this up. I'm not going to bring it up. It's done. She deleted her profile. She tore up the information because she says, I don't know. So she now feels she understands a little bit about why she perceived her mother didn't like her, but she's never going to get those answers. And my heart weeps for her, because it would be great if she could have that answer, but the mom, it may be too painful for her mom to have that conversation. They may be shame. I don't know. But again, what I'm trying to help us do is give grace and receive grace when it comes to mothers, because we don't know everything. But now, the other thing that we can do in this journey of breaking the silence is we could acknowledge pain and responsibility. That may be hard to say. And I'm going to do a shameless plug. I've written a few books, and one of the frameworks I have in the books is the ARC framework. And the origin for ARC is a whole different story, but it was coming out of conflict, but it's so applicable to so many things. So the A for the origin of ARC, or origin of a conflict, starts with the A is for acknowledgement. Many times we're not acknowledged, and that can be the root, the beginning of conflict, when we're not acknowledging something. And here we're talking about acknowledging pain and responsibility. As moms, we need to acknowledge that we have done something wrong with our children. And it's not to say you're going to beat yourself up over the head and be woe is me. But when your child is coming to you to say this is how they feel about something, you shouldn't be now justifying your reason for doing so. And as I've told my coaching clients, I know it's hard to have this kind of conversation, because if you haven't healed from your pain, you just want to lash out and justify things. And so you feel as though they're picking on you. So it's hard to hear. But you need to be able to let your child release that, because most parents, we want our children to be able to move on. And so I say, you know what? You got to take that, and then you come and have your session with me, and we just rehash it, get that out, cry your cries with me. But your child wants you to acknowledge that you weren't there, that because you weren't there, they may have suffered trauma because of your addiction, because of whatever it is, you fill in the blank. They want you to acknowledge their pain. And that's what you need to do. You need to sit there and hear their pain. Don't try to give excuses and say, oh, I was trying to work because I was trying to make sure you have food on your table. They don't want to hear that. They want you as the mom to hear and acknowledge their pain. Let them release that on you. I know it's going to be difficult. I'm not saying it's not going to be difficult, because in your mind, you're going to be thinking, I was trying to, I was trying to, I was just trying to keep it together. I was trying not to go to the crazy house. I was trying not to be that mama who drove off the bridge. They don't realize the mental health or the other stuff that you were going to, just trying to keep that stuff together. They don't know. And they don't particularly care to know. They want us to hear their pain. And so we're talking about being able to acknowledge our mistakes, let them poop on you. Let them get it out. And then you go get it out on a therapist. You take what they have to say, let them release their pain, and you find yourself a therapist and you deal with that there. So we have to be able to let them talk about how they felt neglected, how they, because of that neglect, because of that addiction, they were put into foster care, or they end up being molested by someone. Whatever that is, they need to get it out to you so you can hear it. Whew. So we want to be able to do that. But one of the things that I want you to keep in mind is that as you learn to take responsibility in a healthy way, acknowledging is the first step towards healing and reconciliation for you and for your your child. But there is a difference between constructive acknowledgement and destructive guilt. And that's what I want to talk about. We're not going to try to do this guilt stuff. So here's constructive. So what do you say? What is constructive acknowledgement? I'm glad you asked. Think of constructive acknowledgement as that gentle yet honest friend who points out something you might need to work on, but does it with kindness and the intent to help you grow. It's about recognizing your mistakes or shortcomings in a way that's straightforward, but also forgiving. For example, you might say to yourself, I wish I had been more patient with my child in that moment. I can see how my reaction may have made them feel upset. I'm going to try a different approach next time. This kind of acknowledgement is about learning and moving forward. It's proactive and keeps you focused on solution and growth. It's all about giving yourself the space to say, yes, I made a mistake, but I can learn from it. But what, on the other hand, now, destructive guilt is like that cloud that hangs over you, coloring everything in shades of blame and regret. It involves beating yourself up over past actions and getting stuck in a loop of negative self talk. You might find yourself thinking, I'm a bad parent, or I always mess things up without moving towards a resolution or forgiveness. Destructive guilt is paralyzing and keeps you trapped in the past, often blowing things out of proportions and preventing you from seeing the many aspects of a solution. So there's the difference. So moving from guilt to acknowledgement, to shift from destructive guilt to constructive acknowledgement, start by changing your inner dialogue. Recognize when you're being overly critical with yourself and try to reframe those thoughts to be more forgiving and solution oriented. Practicing self compassion is key. I'm going to say that one more time. Hashtag practicing self compassion is key. Treat yourself as you would a good friend. When you make a mistake, instead of letting guilt take over and ask yourself, I'm sorry, what can I learn from this, or how can I handle this better? So, by embracing constructive acknowledgement, it allows you to address your actions and their impact without letting guilt keep you from growing and enjoying life. It's about making peace with the past and using your experiences as stepping stones to a more understanding and compassionate self. So we're not doing the guilt beating thing. If you keep hitting yourself over the, oh, I was such a bad mom. I was an addict, or I had some mental health issues. I did this. You need to do it. I'll give you an example for myself in acknowledgement. I remember when I remember a pivotal point in which I harmed my child verbally, in something that I said. And again, this is how come I was kind of rolling my eyes when the man was talking about church with moms and praying. So this is just so ironic. I thought I was going to homeschool my daughter. And so we're doing our Bible lesson. And of all the lessons we're doing the Bible lesson. And we have First Corinthians 13. We're doing the love chapter. And this is no excuse, but I had just had my third child a few months ago. Again, had no business doing all this. But there was a blow up as we're talking about love is patient, love is kind. My daughter said she did something and she said, I hate you. And you know what this immature mother said? I said, I hate you too. You know, she remembers that episode when I was so unkind. And soon after that, I found her a school to go to. But recently, we did a counseling session together, which was wonderful. And that's something I encouraged you to do if your child is willing for you to do so. And when she recollects that that particular example's core memory in her life. She felt by me sending her to school that I was saying I didn't like her or want her to be around, that I didn't love her. Whereas in my mind, I was like, let me put her in a safe space because I am in no I am in no headspace to do this. But again, from a child's perspective, she felt abandoned. She felt unloved. And I needed to hear that in order for her to be able to move forward in her journey of healing. And yes, you may want to give excuses and whatever, but acknowledging the pain that it had on your child, let them say that. Let them get it out because in their little eyes, they viewed it differently. And we have to acknowledge that that was their reality. That was their understanding of what happened in there. So, how are we going to do this empathy for ourselves? So, we want you to practice some self compassion as we talk about there. Be kind to yourself. We want you to practice some open communication if your family is willing to do so. I am not saying if your family is combative, if you are combative, you may need to find a therapist to help you navigate how to have those conversations because we don't want that back and forth volume of, oh, it's your fault, this fault, this fault. That doesn't serve anyone anything. So if you haven't learned open communication yet, you need to go find a therapist, a counselor, mom, so that you can get some tools to work with if you want to try to reconcile or move forward. Because again, your children may say, I'm done with you. And in your mind, you're thinking, you did so much for them. They're not grateful. Again, from their lens, there was something lacking. And that's just how it is. One of the other things I need you to do is set realistic expectations. Understand that when you're trying to reconcile with someone, it's a process, not a one time event. It's just like, I told them I'm sorry, they should get over it. Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. It's just like saying if you got a cut, well, I dabbed on it, it should stop bleeding. Why is it still bleeding? Again, it may take a little bit more applying pressure for a longer period of time. Depending on how deep the wound is, it may need to have some surgery. You hear me? Some of those wounds are deep, they're not superficial. So and then it could have, you know, my dad's a physician and we talk about broken bones years ago and different things. If a broken bone has not been set properly and healed broken, sometimes it's more pain when you have to re-break it to now set it correctly. So reconciliation, guys, is not, oh, I told them I'm sorry I wasn't present in their lives, why they can't get over it and have me in their lives and I have the grandchildren. Nope. This reconciliation could be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years before it is as you want it to be. So you need to know moving forward that it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time for your child to trust you again. They have to get to know this new person of you now versus the person they remembered as a child who they felt trauma from. They have to make sure it's a safe space. They may not want their children around you because they feel that you're negative or that they feel that you um, do that that passive aggressive kind of talk. That's a lot of things that I hear from a lot of young people, that they're those innuendos, those little digs that parents, mothers can camouflage as a compliment, but it's like a little jab that they do. And we have to admit we're guilty of that. I remember making a conscious choice not to guilt my children into coming home for holidays or different things like that. We need to stop that. That's what some of us learned. We learned that poor behavior of whining. It's like, oh, you didn't send me something. You didn't love me. Oh, why you didn't come around for Thanksgiving? We need to stop. We need to stop that. We need to stop guilting our children into a behavior or getting them to do what we would want to do. And so this generation is like, I'm not putting up with that. I'm not going to let you do that. And so they've cut you off. So you need to set realistic expectations on what this reconciliation process may look like. I've already told you to seek professional guidance. Get a therapist. Get a therapist. You're never too old to get a therapist. So if you're in your 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you've had some trauma, some foolishness dealt to you by your family, get some help so that you can be healthy and you can now say to your adult child, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm willing to have that conversation with you so you can get these things off your chest. So hashtag see a therapist. And if this one isn't working for you, because this is a side note, years ago when I was having trouble in my own life and I went to see a counselor therapist, he was horrible, but he gave me one piece of advice and I never went back again. And I should have kept trying to find someone better, but we didn't have the resources that we have now. And I was in an area where it was predominantly not my culture. And so the person was not my culture and he was horrible. When I think back of my session there, but I never tried again. And that was on me. I should have tried to find someone else to talk to. Practice accountability. Oh, guys. And that's where a coach comes in. Again, I'm not a therapist, but for a coach, practicing accountability, having somebody hold you to it. The best compliment I got the other day was one of my daughters. She called about something and she said, man, I can't even get my mama on my side. Why do I have reasonable people in my life to check her? Because again, you want to have accountability. You don't want to go to your girlfriends and they say, oh yeah, I don't know why your child ain't talking to you, such and such and such and such. Find some accountability, someone who's going to hold you accountable and be able to speak to the actions that you want to do better. The other thing I like us to do is engage in reflective practices. So that could be journaling or a meditative exercise, helping you understand the triggers as you deal with whatever issues happened to you in your childhood that were traumatic. Because the other thing too, side note, when people talk about, and those of you listening, thank you for tuning in. This is Mother's Day podcast 2024, where we're breaking the silence with mothers, mistakes, and moving on. And I just wanted to have a candid conversation for the elephant in the room, for those of you who may not have been getting a Mother's Day card today, who can't see your grandchildren because your children have said no. They've set a boundary that you must respect, that you are not going to have any contact with them. You may have said something harmful about their lifestyle, and so you've cut them off. And that breaks my heart each time. I hear of stories where people cut their children out, and again, to each his own. But it breaks my heart when I hear that. But you must do what you need to do, parent, child, for your mental health, whatever that's going to look like. One of the things I wanted to encourage us about, because we're going to be wrapping up. I know I've been talking a whole lot, but definitely when you hear the replay, you can put your comments in the chat, and I'm going to upload it on my YouTube channel as well too. But self-forgiveness. Oh, We need to be able to forgive ourselves, moms. Acknowledge that you screwed up. You didn't know what you were doing, had no business having no babies, but we did. And so forgive yourself for things that did happen. I remember having a conversation with my daughter and telling her what I would have done differently. And I think that was cathartic for both of us. But it was the one thing that you just don't know that you don't know until years later. It's just like, wow, that could have been an option. You just didn't think about it, you didn't know it. And so being able to have that self forgiveness. And I like when they say, think of each act of self forgiveness as planting a seed. Sometimes you might feel frustrated because the seed doesn't sprout right away, or maybe the growth isn't as quick or as straight as you hope. That's okay. Every garden grows at its own pace, and so does the process of forgiving yourself. So being able to just forgive yourself for, um, being with that baby daddy. I know I'm guilty. I would watch uh Maury often and Jerry Springer about who's you're the father. And so some of you may have regretted that one night stand or that one act when you were inebriated or you were assaulted and you birthed a child. And so therefore forgive yourself. Forgive yourself. Back in the day, they would blame you if you were assaulted. Oh, you should have done this, should have done that. Never making the male accountable for that violent act. It was always put on the woman that it was her fault. And so we had to live with the guilt of that. Plus, now we have a child that you must raise, and you can't emotionally give love to it because, again, the circumstances in which it was conceived. And again, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for not being able to bond or connect with the child because you didn't have anything to give. You didn't have any emotional deposit in your own spirit to give to this young child. And so they grew up feeling unloved, unable to whew, love. And so the process of self forgiveness is a journey, and it requires you to nurture self awareness. And that's the other A in my antidote with my arc. I have awareness for the A, I have relationship for the R, and K, kindness for the antidote. And I also deal with the different emotions that you can have with arc. You have A, anger; R, resentment; K, keen disappointment. And my origin for arc, the A is for acknowledgement, the R is for the need to be right or respected, and the K is the need to know. But I'm just throwing that in there so you can check out my books on Amazon as well too. But the journey for self forgiveness means you need to nurture that self awareness, and you need to slowly start weeding out that harsh judgment that we tend to do to ourselves. And if you aren't able to do that by journaling or meditating, again, I repeat, get a counselor. Get a counselor to help you deal with past baggage. And when you're ready to move forward, get a coach. I'm available to help you move forward. Because remember that self forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. You can't forget the past. I can't forget the past. I can't forget what I did. You can't forget the past. It's not forgetting the past or excusing the mistake. It's about giving yourself grace to move forward without the heavy burden of those unkindness words towards yourself. It's about saying, I am learning. Say after me, I am learning, I am growing, and I am worthy of my own kindness. Let's say it again. I am learning, I am growing, and I am worthy of my own kindness. So keep tending your garden of self forgiveness, watering it with understanding and patience, And over time, you'll see how much more vibrant and resilient your garden you have become in your growth of forgiveness. So, now, what are we going to do moving forward? Keep in mind, again, your children may have nothing to do with you still, and they have a right to their boundaries. Respect their boundaries. If they say don't call them, respect their boundaries. If they say don't call me after such and such time, because one of the biggest gripes that the younger generation have is that their parents don't respect their boundaries because we want to treat them like they're children and they have to do what we have to say. That's not true. Parents, moms, they're adults now. They can say and do and make their choices however they wish. They have their right to do that without any comment or say from us. You need to respect that. You need to respect their decisions they make for themselves, their families, their children. End of story. Respect. You don't have to agree with it. No, 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 no. This is how they want to raise their children, and they get to decide whether or not you are a part of it. You just got to respect it. But what can you do moving forward? Because it's uncharted waters, whether or not they're going to reconcile with you. I want to encourage you to set fresh personal goals. Think about what you want for yourself beyond your role as a mom. You're more than a mom. Maybe it's picking up an old hobby you used to love, or perhaps something as big as a new career path, or going back to school. Setting new goals give you something exciting to focus on and work towards instead of you sitting there waiting by the phone. Oh, they didn't call me. It also helps to bring you a sense of accomplishment and personal growth. Maria, this life coach, Maria Gonzalez, she says, goals give us direction and a reason to look forward to each day. I have some clients who they spend all day waiting on the phone for a phone call. And I'm like, get a life, get a hobby, set some fresh goals. If the relationship can be reconciled and come, it will happen. You don't need to stay waiting by the phone, beating yourself up, feeling guilty because you didn't do what you had to do as a mom. So embrace some fresh goals. So when you see this, tell me a goal you've done. I have several goals that I've started. Hobbies. Oh, tell me about it. I want you to embrace self-care. Now we know that that's just a trendy phrase sometime, but it's really crucial for your well-being. It can be as simple but important as getting enough sleep. I have some of my clients who say they barely get 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I'm like, what? Sleep is what your body needs in order to recharge itself so you can have fresh perspective. And I remember meeting this lady the other day, and I could tell she was worried, relationship with her child, and it was worrying her to death. And I said, I can see on your countenance that it's killing you. You need to take care of yourself because you'll be in your grave and your son will come around, and it's just like, don't do that. Don't do that. We're not called to die for our children, you know, not in that kind of way where we to our detriment of our health. So please remember to take care of yourself, get some rest, set aside time for nature. You don't even have to just going out in nature for fresh air. Just inhale the beauty of the creator or the higher power that you believe in. It's just in awe, just to stand in awe of him, of that. Self care is the fuel that allows us to handle life challenges with more resilience. And that's from a therapist, Helen Park. So I'm going to say that again. Self care is the fuel that allows us to handle life challenges with more resilience, by the therapist Helen Park. The other thing, so we talk about set fresh goals, embrace self care, find your support network. So, whether it's reconnecting with friends or making new friends, some of you have cut yourself off and made yourself mom that you have no life outside of your children. Create a network, find an interest. We talked about finding a hobby or doing something. Find something else, and you may have failed with your children when they were younger. You get a chance to redo it. Find some children that you can love on, who are looking for a grandmother figure, who are looking for our foster care. They need people or volunteers. Find someone that you can give this love to now that you didn't give to your child when they needed it. Find a different outlet for it. So find your support network. And I like this quote here. The same therapist, Helen Park, says, being a part of community helps remind us that we're not alone in our struggle. So find a network. We talked about seeking professional help. I'm going to say that again. Get some professional help. You're not able to move forward, a therapist can give you some tools and strategies specifically tailored to your situation, because each situation is different. It's not a one size fit all. Get a therapist if you need to do so. Reflect and reevaluate. Life is constantly changing, and so are we. So, regularly take time to reflect on your progress and reevaluate your goals and strategies. Maybe something that worked for you 6 months doesn't fit anymore, and that's okay. Adjusting your approach can help you stay aligned with your own needs and the realities of your approach. Because moving forward is about finding joy and peace, regardless of the bumps along the way. It's about building a life that feels fulfilling and happy to you. And remember, it's perfectly fine to move at your own pace. Each step is a small part of your path to a brighter and more helpful future. And so I want to just come alongside those of you who aren't having a happy Mother's Day because of mistakes made in the past. But I want to encourage you that there is life after the mistakes, that you can move on. And if you choose to get a therapist and see how you can heal from your own situations, there may be a possibility of reconciliation. If there's not a possibility of reconciliation, think about the things we've talked about and be brave enough to move forward and realize that there's still love that you can share with somebody else in this phase of life. I remember this one particular person I know, they were not very kind when I was growing up. And I knew they weren't kind to their children either. And years later, when I went back home and all of that, this person has changed completely. And they had a child, they had a little child with them that the child was calling them grandma, but I knew that wasn't her birth grandchild. But this child loved her. She loved on that child and the child's parent. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Uh, I couldn't have foreseen that because I knew that person when they weren't kind. And here it is, life happened and they were moving it differently. So give yourself the grace that even though you may not have been there for your children when they needed to, and understand they're seeing it from a child's lens, what happened, and it is real for them. We need to acknowledge their pain if we want to reestablish a relationship with them. So hashtag therapy. We got plenty of virtual. So even if you live on one side of the country and they're on the other side of the country, you can have a virtual session with their therapist so that you guys can be able to move forward in an adult healthy relationship, but they need to get things out. So, thank you for joining me on this Mother's Day. For those of you, as we break the silence of mothers, mistakes, and moving on, my name is Carla, and I'm your relationship doula, helping women bravely birth peace in the pieces of their lives. And check me out on Amazon. I have 3 books there, one on overcoming the key to overcoming conflict. I have one that's called Imposter My Ass. And I have a short little one called Comedy of Blessings, my journey as a caregiver with my parents. So definitely check them out on Amazon, paperback, Kindle, and Audible. But thank you for listening. And if you know a mother that could you hear this conversation where she can learn to give herself grace, definitely share that with them in their journey. So I'm going to see. Thank you guys for listening. For those of you who are listening on the replay, thank you. Have a rest of the good day of unhappy Mother's Day or whatever it may look like. Take care, guys. Till next time. Bye.